Taiwan looks untouchable. It has become the place where the world's most advanced chips are made, the tiny pieces of silicon that run AI models, fighter jets, smartphones, cloud servers, and basically half the modern economy. If you want the crown jewel of advanced semiconductor manufacturing, you go to Taiwan. End of story. And that's exactly why people assume Taiwan is secure. But here's the dirty little secret: when one economy becomes this important, its biggest strength can also become its most dangerous weakness. A new macroeconomic study from MIT just pointed to a single choke point that could freeze Taiwan's chip machine almost overnight. Not a war. Not a blockade. Not even a direct factory strike. One vulnerability. One layer of dependency. One point of failure. If that sounds absurd, good. That means you understand how much is riding on this. So what exactly did MIT find? Why does one hidden bottleneck matter more than the factory itself? And why does Taiwan's chip dominance create more risk the more successful it gets? The empire built on one island. Taiwan's semiconductor dominance did not happen by accident. It came from decades of industrial policy, specialized engineering talent, supplier concentration, and a global business model that rewarded extreme efficiency over resilience. The crown jewel is TSMC, which sits at the center of the world's most advanced chip production. According to industry data widely cited by companies like TrendForce, Semi, and the Taiwan government's own statistics, Taiwan accounts for the overwhelming share of leading-edge foundry output. If you are talking about the most advanced nodes used in AI accelerators, high-performance computing, and premium smartphones, Taiwan is not just important. It is the bottleneck. That sounds like power. And it is. But power in supply chains has a funny habit of coming with a hidden bill. Think about it like this. Imagine a bakery that supplies nearly every fancy wedding cake in the city. Everyone thinks the bakery is secure because demand is huge. But the bakery depends on one flour mill, one refrigeration system, and one delivery route. If any one of those fails, the cake empire does not slowly decline. It stops. Taiwan's chip sector is a bit like that, except the cakes are worth trillions of dollars and the flour is made from ultra-pure chemicals, lithography tools, precision gases, advanced packaging, and a web of imported industrial inputs that all have to arrive on time, in the right condition, and without interruption. That is where MIT's finding becomes interesting. The choke point. The study points to a singular vulnerability in the system, not the fabs themselves, but the infrastructure dependency behind them. Advanced chip production is not just about having brilliant engineers and expensive factories. It requires an uninterrupted flow of electricity, water, specialized equipment, chemicals, spare parts, and logistics coordination. And among those, one input stands out as the most dangerous single point of failure: water and power reliability at scale. That may sound boring. It is not. Semiconductor fabs are absurdly sensitive. They consume enormous volumes of ultra-pure water, and they require a stable, high-quality electricity supply. You cannot run a world-leading chip plant like a normal factory. A tiny disruption can ruin batches worth millions. A longer disruption can knock entire production schedules off track. And because Taiwan's industry is so concentrated, the entire world feels it when Taiwan sneezes. According to Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs and chip industry reports, the island has repeatedly faced drought risk, typhoon disruption, and power grid stress. This is not theoretical. Taiwan has already lived through water shortages severe enough to trigger rationing concerns for industrial users. It has also had periodic concerns about electricity supply as demand from households, industry, and digital infrastructure keeps rising. In other words, Taiwan's chip empire is less like a fortress and more like a perfectly tuned machine sitting in a room where the lights and water pressure have to keep working forever. Why this matters globally? This is not just Taiwan's problem. It is everybody's problem. The IMF, World Bank, and OECD have repeatedly highlighted how concentrated semiconductor production creates systemic global risk. If Taiwan's output stalls, the shock does not stay in Asia. It hits American AI firms, European auto manufacturers, Japanese electronics companies, and every government that wants to pretend strategic autonomy is going well. To understand why, let's use one more simple analogy. Imagine three people sharing one printer. Person A prints the school report. Person B prints the tax forms. Person C prints the legal contract that needs to be signed today. Now imagine that one printer is located in a room with no backup power, no spare toner, and a leaky pipe in the ceiling. That is modern semiconductor supply. When people say Taiwan controls 90% of the world's advanced chips, they are describing concentration. But concentration cuts both ways. The more the world depends on one supplier, the more every weakness in that supplier gets magnified. And Taiwan has a few. The macro pressure. Here is where the economics gets ugly. Taiwan's economy is deeply tied to semiconductors, which means the island's growth is unusually dependent on one high-value sector. That creates a strange macro structure. When chip demand is booming, Taiwan looks spectacular. When chip demand slows, the economy can feel the shock fast. The government's own data, along with figures from Taiwan's Directorate General of Budget, Accounting and Statistics, show how central exports are to the economy. Chips are not just a product. They are the backbone of the trade surplus, industrial investment, and a huge share of Taiwan's global bargaining power. But if your entire economic story depends on one sector, then any vulnerability in that sector becomes a national economic issue, not just an industrial one. This is why the MIT study matters. It is not saying Taiwan is broken. It is saying Taiwan is overoptimized. And overoptimization is great right up until it is not. The hidden fragility. The real vulnerability is not that Taiwan lacks capability. It is that its capability is so concentrated that resilience gets sacrificed for efficiency. That is how modern industry works. Firms chase the lowest cost, the highest output, and the tightest specialization. Governments love the prestige. Investors love the margins. Everyone celebrates the miracle. Then someone asks what happens if one key input fails, and suddenly the silence is louder than the answer. Taiwan's chip sector depends on imported chip-making tools from the Netherlands, Japan, and the United States. Complex chemical and materials supply chains. Ultra-reliable power generation. High-quality water systems. A secure logistics environment. A labor force with specialized technical skills. That is a lot of moving parts for a story people like to describe as invulnerable. And because the industry is so advanced, there is no easy backup. You cannot just move leading-edge production to another country in 6 months. Even with the CHIPS Act in the United States and massive fab investments in Japan and elsewhere, it takes years to replicate the ecosystem around Taiwan. The fabs are only the visible part. The supplier network, engineering know-how, and operational discipline are the real moat. Which means any shock to Taiwan's internal infrastructure gets exported to the entire world before the world even has time to panic properly. The twist. Here is the part most people get wrong. They assume Taiwan's biggest risk is geopolitical invasion. That risk is real, obviously. But it is not the only one, and in some cases it is not even the most immediate one. The more interesting vulnerability is that a highly sophisticated semiconductor economy can be stressed by slower, messier, less dramatic forces, drought, grid instability, supply chain friction, and the pressure of keeping an ultra-complex system running without interruption. In other words, the empire may not fail because of one cinematic event. It may suffer because modern industrial systems are far less forgiving than people think. That is the uncomfortable truth. The world spends a lot of time worrying about tanks, missiles, and blockades. It spends less time worrying about whether a manufacturing ecosystem can keep its power on and its water pure at the exact scale required by the most advanced chips on Earth. But that is how real fragility hides. Not in the obvious catastrophe. In the small dependency nobody wanted to model too closely. Why the world should care. If Taiwan's chip output gets disrupted, the impact would be immediate and ugly. AI infrastructure would slow. Smartphone production would face delays. Automotive supply chains would tighten again. Cloud capital expenditure would